Venezuela has been in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism since the day Hugo Chavez was elected president of the country. Since that very day, there has been a non-stop effort to destabilize the country in an effort to bring it under U.S. control once again. Venezuela has historically been a colony of the U.S. who has served its purpose of supplying oil to the country. It's also an OPEC member, which grants it a certain power in the world via oil prices. Immediately following his election, the U.S. began a campaign to paint Chavez as a dictator who was the most dangerous man in Latin America. In terms of threat to the U.S. imperialism in the region, he certainly was. His democratic Bolivarian revolution set an example for other countries to resist U.S. hegemony. As history records, it was one big pain in the backside for the U.S. and its belief that it should control what happens in its own backyard. Chavez came to power with the goal of transforming the country along the lines of human need, not human greed. Almost immediately, he nationalized more of the oil industry into a state company, Petróleos de Venezuela S.A., or the PDVSA. With the new oil revenue, he and his party, the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, began producing alternatives to U.S.-owned corporations and domestic oligarchies. Radical efforts were undertaken to mobilize the poor. Entire barrios, also known as shanty towns, were made into mini enclaves and then given loans to begin infrastructure development. These semi-communities gave a new autonomy to the poor. Slumlords that had brutalized their tenants had their buildings confiscated and handed over to a council of tenants with the option of taking a loan to improve their collective home. This example of self-determination and empowerment of the masses was too much for the U.S. to bear. It had to be put to a stop. Their example of what could be achieved if the people united against U.S. imperialism is dangerous. Money began flowing from the CIA to non-governmental organizations in Venezuela. The National Endowment for Democracy began operations to destabilize the country via disinformation campaigns. As the success of the Bolivarian Revolution continued, the U.S. resorted to using terrorist attacks against the oil industry in an effort to destroy the economy. This effort to bring the country to ruin continues to this day with the economic sabotage by Citibank. Just recently, the bank announced that it was closing the Venezuelan government's foreign currency accounts within a month. With no warning, Citibank says that in 30 days it will close the central bank and the Bank of Venezuela's accounts, Maduro said in a speech, adding that the government used the U.S. banks for transactions in the United States and globally. This chapter of Venezuelan history is long and complicated and covered in blood, but it's just another day for the global capitalist system and its desire to keep profits. During late 2015 and mid-2016, there was a crisis of food shortages in Venezuela. The pro-imperialist media hailed this as proof of the failure of socialism. Important to note is that Venezuela isn't socialist, it's social democratic. Images of long lines are posted by the media and U.S. outlets claiming that people are starving in the country and that there's soon going to be mass starvation. U.S. think tanks are on the warpath, introducing disinformation aimed at manipulating public opinion. The goal is to collapse the Bolivarian Revolution and allow U.S. imperialism to gain a firm footing in the country and the oil reserves once again. No doubt there is a food crisis in the country, but it is not, however, being reported honestly. The causes are far from what is being claimed. Simply-mindedly, socialism as a system in general is being blamed. Lowbrow explanations that are basically, they always run out of other people's money. Those that bother to look for an actual explanation are met with claims such as a significant portion of oil revenues was simply stolen. Of course, Cato Institute's Juan Carlos Hidalgo gives no actual explanation of how this caused food shortages. Other sources claim that the government just let production of food fall. Interestingly, they don't provide anything to demonstrate this, nor don't they usually support the government not monitoring things like that if this were the case? The reason is because they can't. The majority of food is actually imported from other countries. There's a very good reason why this is the case. Venezuela has been held as a single crop economy. Their whole thing is dependent upon oil. Not much else is actually produced in the country, instead it's imported. This is the way the country was set up by U.S. imperialism. If at any point the country tries to get out from U.S. control, they can simply embargo them or ruin the price of their single commodity export. This allows the U.S. to discipline the country, forcing it to serve the interests of imperialism. This is not uncommon for many developing countries placed under imperialist pressure. This is particularly the case for Caribbean and Latin American countries. These falsehoods are produced deliberately to slander the Bolivarian Revolution. It should be noted that these shortages only affect the poorer areas. Wealthy areas of Venezuela are fully stocked and customers are happy. This has come to light when a man, Agustin Atoxo-Tozorina, a Basque executive living in Caracas. He showed pictures of his wealthy area with plenty of food. His photos were published in various social media, instantly denounced as fake by the anti-Venezuelan online community. The pictures were outright ignored in the imperialist media. Since the history of imperialism in Venezuela has forced the neglect of other industry, it's exacerbated the problems it faces now. The current president, Nicolas Maduro, has already called for changes in the economy to include necessary goods. He said, "The Bolivarian economic agenda has for several branches. The first is urgently to address the crisis. Another one is to lay the foundation for the new economy. Our country must find the accurate road to national economic development. Looking for exits in complicated times, search for way out of the pits where we fell due to the neoliberal model," he said. The new policy involves a special centralized plan which favors domestic production and stimulation, both national, small, and medium industry, and the social economy. This move could take quite a while to bring into full swing. So what's causing the shortage itself? The culprits are large grocery chains and importers which remain in the hands of the capitalist class. The weapon they are using is the multiple exchange rates. Essentially, this conversion of bolivars into US dollars facilitates a great import scam by the bourgeoisie. Currency manipulation is being used side by side with falsehoods about the importation of food. The scam works like this. There are multiple exchange rates in Venezuela that convert bolivars to US dollars. The idea was to give a preferential exchange rate to importers so that they could purchase imports more easily. This preferential exchange rate and the growing gap in exchange rates is what is allowing large retail businesses and importers to cause shortages. When a company wants to import essential goods, i.e. food, in this case, they're required to go to the central bank and purchase US dollars at the preferential rate for necessary imports. The rate is about 6.3 bolivars to the dollar. Current figures put it around 10 bolivars. The company then gives those US dollars to whomever they wish to import from. Alongside this exchange rate is the illegal parallel market rate. This rate is set at 500 bolivars to the US dollar. This difference is where the scam takes place. A private importer goes to the central bank and requests to exchange bolivars for US dollars. To do this, he claims he purchased 100 cases of groceries for 1,000 US dollars. In actuality, he only purchased 50 of them. The 50 he did import, he sells to businesses at the illegal parallel market rate. Each case cost him $10, or 63 bolivars, but he can sell each one at 5,000 bolivars due to the parallel rate. This massively inflates the price of goods while allowing the importer to pocket a gigantic profit. So what about the other 500 US dollars? Usually the importer will exchange those US dollars at the illegal parallel market rate for $250,000. In many cases, the importer doesn't exchange the leftover bolivars into US dollars. Instead, they take the money overseas for investment or they place it in a hidden account. In other cases, they take the whole 1,000 US dollars and move it to an offshore account. Doing this on a large scale has caused a currency flight from the country. The amount estimated for this loss is around 300 billion bolivars between 2003 and 2016. Pro-imperialist media claim this money was stolen by corrupt officials. However, it is far more plausible that this money has been taken out of the country by the economic elite of the country, who have been allowed to remain. Now, how much is 300 billion? It's greater than the GDP of many countries around the world, including Finland, Pakistan, Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Iraq, and New Zealand. This is the kind of economic sabotage Venezuela is facing from the actions of the capitalist class. Not only are the economic elite siphoning off vast amounts of money from the economy, but they're inflating the price of essential goods well beyond what they should be. Next time this subject comes up, ask an opponent of the Bolivarian government to explain why prices are so high and supply is so low. Almost always they won't give you an answer, other than to say that it's the fault of socialism. It's only possible to carry out this scam because there are multiple exchange rates. The policy is absolutely wrong. I'm not even sure why what they were trying to accomplish with it. In this case, I blame the Venezuelan government for not having nationalized the import industry and grocery stores, and I blame them for having an ineffective exchange rate policy. In response to this problem, the government opened up the border. Citizens were free to cross into Colombia to purchase the essentials that were being hindered by economic sabotage. Unfortunately, they were met with exorbitant prices. Colombia is facing its own price problems, which are going relatively unreported in the media. Goods like flour and sugar are scarce now, so the supply is limited, said Pedro, a Colombian grocery store owner. Many of the stores place a limit on how much a single customer could purchase. It should be noted that Venezuela was listed as having almost abolished hunger by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in 2015. Opening the border is not the only measure they've taken. Since the shortages started, the government has accelerated existing food programs and supply much-needed groceries to the public. Along with the acceleration, they've implemented a few modifications to their programs and approaching problems a new way. More specifically, there is a program that creates a synergy between local grassroots organizations and the government. A new one that carries out such cooperation is the Local Provisioning and Production Committees, known as CLAP. They organize an alternative food distribution network in all 24 states. It's really quite innovative. CLAPs have a twofold purpose. In the immediate term, they are working to combat lines, shortages, and speculation by delivering basic food products directly to people. The government purchases goods directly from both private and state enterprises, which the CLAPs distribute house to house based on community consensus. The project is seen as a temporary stopgap solution to the current shortages, aimed at the most vulnerable fifth of the population. In the longer term, CLAPs are also intended to engage in local food production and processing. In tandem, a major push for the urban agriculture, overseen by the newly formed Ministry of Urban Agriculture. A recent 100-day planting campaign involved 29,000 urban productive spaces throughout the country with the aims of increasing the amount of fresh produce, eggs, fish, and animal protein available locally. These efforts are complemented by a renewed push for production in the countryside. Citizen participation in agriculture has exploded. People are engaging in backyard farming, bartering vegetables, exchanging seeds, and carrying out their own cooperatives. Many are creating their own small food businesses. As it stands right now, agriculture represents 3% of the GDP and 10% of the labor force. A reduced supply of industrial agriculture inputs is also driving a transition towards organic practices and agroecology, in what some are likening to Cuba's special period. The shortages are also causing a shift from processed foods to a renewed appreciation for local foods and traditional foodways. Many activists see these developments as elements of a new food system, a project they have been trying to advance for many years. In July, the government seized a large U.S. producer of goods in the country, Kimberly-Clark. About a month earlier, the company fired 900 workers, claiming that they lacked the raw materials necessary to continue production. The factory was seized by the government and handed over to the workers who were previously employed there. Once the factory had been handed over, Nicolas Maduro, the president, authorized $22 million to be loaned to the enterprise to purchase the raw materials needed to begin operations again. Its products are certainly essential. The factory can produce every month 25 million diapers, 18 million sanitary napkins, and 33 million rolls of toilet paper, products that have been in short supply throughout Venezuela. The big question remains, what do they do now? What measures would be necessary to repair the economy and allow Venezuela to exercise self-determination while minimizing interference by the imperialists? For this answer, I spoke with a friend who has a background in economics. A few good ideas came out of our discussion and we feel that would do the job. Here I'll go into a bit of detail about what he thinks needs to be done. Immediate economic reform is vital. The multiple exchange rates should be abolished without delay. One moderate exchange rate should be established. The price of Venezuelan oil should be raised and subsidies for domestic oil consumption should be eliminated. The subsidy generally benefits the middle and upper classes due to the fact that the lower classes don't consume much in the way of oil. The reduced domestic rate mostly serves to help the upper classes who can afford the oil anyway. Government revenues would increase significantly, allowing funds to be transferred into much more important social programs. Revenue from petroleum exports accounts for more than 50% of the country's GDP and roughly 95% of total exports. Raising the price for oil for export a small percent would also help alleviate the drop in revenue from the global oil price decrease. Manufacturing in the country should be increased as well. Already produces heavy industry products such as steel, aluminum, and cement. The actual means of production need to be added to the manufacturing sector, not just the circulating constant capital. More specifically, they should invest in the production of Department 1 commodities. This category is made up of constant capital, machinery, software, basically the means of production that other capitalists purchase for carrying out production. The benefit of producing these in Venezuela is that it will insulate itself from the global price system for the oil industry constant capital. Embargoes and sanctions against the oil industry technology won't work on them. They're vulnerable here due to the oil-based economy. Plus, it will benefit from what they export. This will free up the necessary capital for food imports. One of the mistakes Venezuela has made is not reinvesting enough in oil profits back into production. Some of the technology is falling behind as a result. A significant reinvestment of capital would increase the efficiency of the industry, leading to a lower cost of production in the long run, leading to more oil-based revenue. With oil as their primary national industry, it is nothing short of neglectful to do otherwise. Now, in Marxism, we divide commodities into two departments. Department 1 contains the means of production, capital invested in producing materials, machinery, and anything else that a capitalist would need for carrying out production, including inputs like steel. Department 2 contains the means of living, the consumer goods of society for workers and capitalists. This also includes luxury items. We differentiate between these two groups for a reason. In traditional Keynesianism, you spend state funds on public projects in order to stimulate demand for goods and services. But since Marxists make a differentiation between these two types of commodities, we build up the productive forces first, which can produce the consumer goods that will enter into demand as a result of the wage increases. In this way, you build up the productive forces necessary to facilitate the production of new consumer goods that will be in demand. This is the path the Soviets took, which proved to be absolutely correct. It built up the necessary means of production to carry out the industrialization process. Since the prices of oil and other raw materials have collapsed, Venezuela and others has been left with huge budget shortfalls. National income from oil used to account for 96% of the foreign currency earnings. After the collapse, it represented only 75%. This makes it difficult to pay foreign debt. Instead of using foreign currencies of a higher value, they're using their own lower currency to pay those debts. This means they have to use much more of it to pay it down. For example, at the time of this writing, the bolivar is worth 10 cents to the US dollar. In order to pay back a loan in their own currency, Venezuela has to pay back 10 times as much. In this situation, their ability to pay foreign debt is severely hindered. The Venezuelan government must keep dipping into their reserves of foreign currency in order to continue to service the debt. At other moments, they carry out monetary gold swaps. Many will recall how they called in all their international gold holdings and kept them in the central bank back in 2014. The foresight of this move was brilliant. Selling off gold reserves in foreign currencies to be used to pay for foreign debts is necessary and a smart move in this situation. The debt problem in Venezuela is much worse than it seems. This is due to incorrect ideas about the economy's ability to pay them. It is viewed as possible to pay the debts because it is compared to the GDP converted into US dollars. This is being done at the current DIPRO rate of 1 bolivar to 10 US cents. When you divide the contracted GDP by such an exchange rate, you create an overestimation of the value of the GDP. As a result, you get a distorted picture of the foreign debt as a percentage of the GDP. This is an underestimate that makes the situation look manageable. Others have a false idea that the debt can be paid, that oil prices will increase. They're looking at an artificial increase created by OPEC countries by restricting the supply of it. The idea is that if they restrict the supply, the market will raise the price. These attempts have already failed. They're also ineffective at recovering liquefied foreign currency. The reality of the situation in Venezuela is quite dismal. Their foreign currency reserves have been reduced to a mere 12 billion US dollars. Something must be done to rectify the situation immediately. This foreign currency is absolutely necessary to carrying out import needs and paying down foreign debt. The other noose around the neck is the compensation cases that have been placed upon them by the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. Companies that have been refusing to produce have been appropriated and put back to work. Those companies went demanding compensation for their lost enterprises. In the context of revolution, these companies shouldn't be given anything. Considering that they were trying to carry out economic sabotage, the revolution shouldn't have any pity for the international bourgeoisie. Something needs to be done sooner, or there will be a total collapse of the Bolivarian government and economy. The dangers are very real and require careful action and strong leadership if they are to be handled. As many see it, there are really only two options to take at this point. Eliminate the multiple exchange rates and create a higher one to begin paying down the debts in a more valuable domestic currency. 2. Create a moratorium on debts while payments are restructured. The most effective course would be to go with the latter. Venezuela should tell its creditors that it will be paying back less than what is called for. Less money should be given to the creditors instead steered towards industrial production, the creation of aforementioned a mining deal. The point would be to use the money for investment in expanding the GDP and creating more employment. But production and wages are taxable, which would give the state the revenue necessary to pay off the debts more quickly. A reduction in debt today would save against an astronomical amount of interest in the future. Even worse, a possible total economic collapse. Certainly there's going to be a political backlash against the country for taking such a route. Creditors don't like it when you don't pay back the money they loaned you. The biggest such threat is the possibility of asset and property seizures. The most devastating would be to happen for the state oil company. Right now, the PDVSA has 44 oil tankers, 13 refineries, and bank accounts around the world. The freezing of such assets would hurt the Venezuelan economy greatly, given that it is dependent on oil exports. This would also create an embargo situation. It wouldn't be in the interest of creditors to seize such assets because it would only make it harder for Venezuela to pay back its debts. Essentially, if you sabotage a person's ability to pay back a loan, you won't get the money. They'd be much better off allowing them to reduce the debts and letting them continue on with value creation, enabling them to pay the money they owe. The problem in this situation is that some creditors want Venezuela to collapse so they can bring in a right-wing government and bury the country under neoliberal economic policies. So it's a gamble. It could be argued that if a country defaults on some of its loans, that no one will loan to them again in the future. This is not a likely scenario for a very important reason. No one will exclude Venezuela from the financial markets long term because it has something to pay back loans with. Oil. So long as oil and minerals exist, there will always be an ability to pay and a reason to invest. No one is going to pass up such investment in the long term. Venezuela doesn't have a long-term solvency crisis. It has an immediate liquidity crisis. The debt that is held by their creditors isn't being sold off to other investors because they know the price of oil will rise, leading to an ability to pay off those debts eventually. There's low risk in default in the future once oil and raw material costs rise. Some actions could be taken to try to lessen the debt pressure without defaulting on them. The government could purchase some of the debt back from creditors. This would eliminate payments on the capital and interest. It would also create some breathing room for the government to maneuver. An alteration in the deal with Petrocarbide to begin charging a higher rate of energy would boost revenue. Currently, Petrocarbide provides a subsidized oil program to the Caribbean nations. The price comes in at a low rate and then increases over time. If they adjusted the price to its intended full price, it would provide important funds. Domestic production of commodities currently imported is an absolute necessity. Many who produce domestically are refusing to produce out of protest. Just recently, Kimberly-Clark, as the aforementioned company, was seized by the Venezuelan government and handed over to its workers with a loan to begin production again. Within a short period of time, 2 million sanitary pads were back on the market. Freed up money to be spent on investment in domestic production of goods would solve two problems. First, it would reduce the need of foreign currency for imports, freeing it up to pay foreign debt. Secondly, it would produce industry and wages that can be taxed as the economy expands. Physical capital creation commodities is something that is just plain forgotten about in today's financialized economy. Venezuela could also restructure payments coming in from other countries into U.S. dollars. For example, Venezuela currently is paying for infrastructure projects in China, Brazil, Iran, and others. These reprofiling due dates are scheduled to take place this year and sometimes next year. Asking for U.S. dollars would inflate their currency reserves. Bonds that are about to expire could be substituted for the issuance of new ones that are longer term. Finally, there could be a reduction in military spending and an effort made in the financial markets to rehabilitate their reputation by correcting mistaken ideas about their situation. Defaulting on some debt while reorientating economic policy could be of tremendous benefit to the country. These large creditors can get some, if not most, of their money back, or none of it all. What's it going to be? Creditors are being much harder on Venezuela than is necessary. The financial markets are making Venezuela look worse than they are in regards to debt. This no doubt part of U.S. foreign policy to attack the nation which is struggling to free themselves of imperialist tyranny. Thank you for watching. Won't you go ahead, rate, comment, subscribe, and share on various social media. And if you want, you can head over to my Patreon page and show your support. Or you could head over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.